The late afternoon sun was starting to soften, throwing long shadows across the quiet suburban street. Officer Mark Rock sat in the driver's seat of his patrol car, feeling the familiar mix of boredom and low-grade tension that filled the last hour of his shift. He'd been on the force for 15 years, long enough to know the rhythms of this part of town. It was a nice area, mostly. But he'd seen things change. He'd answered calls here for domestic disputes in big houses, for vandalism at the community pool. He had a feeling about places, a kind of sixth sense developed from seeing too much. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee from his thermos, his eyes automatically scanning the road. The traffic was light. A minivan passed, then a little convertible. Then a car caught his eye. It was a large, newer model SUV, painted a deep slate gray. It was clean, almost shining under the sun, but the windows were dark. Really dark. Tinted well past the legal limit, he was sure of it. It moved at a perfect, unhurried speed, exactly at the limit. Nothing reckless, nothing obvious. But that's what got Rourke's attention. It was too perfect. In his experience, people who went to the trouble to make their car a shadowy box on wheels often had a reason. "Let's just see who we've got," he muttered to himself, the boredom evaporating. He pulled his cruiser out from the side street and fell in behind the SUV, keeping a couple of car lengths back. He ran the license plate through his computer. The system whirred for a second before returning a result. The registration was clean, up to date. It was registered to an individual, not a company. No flags. For most officers, that might have been the end of it. A warning about the tint at most. But Rourke's feeling didn't go away. The pristine condition of the car, the impenetrable windows, the quiet wealth it suggested, it all rubbed him the wrong way in a way he couldn't fully explain. Maybe it was a drug dealer's car. Maybe it was stolen. Maybe the guy inside was just some rich jerk who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Whatever it was, Rourke decided he was going to find out. A traffic stop for illegal window tint was as good a reason as any. He hit the lights. The red and blue splashed across the gray paint of the SUV. For a moment, nothing happened. The car didn't slow. It just kept rolling forward for another 50 yards, which made Rourke's jaw tighten. "Come on, pal," he said. Finally, the SUV's brake lights glowed, and it eased onto the wide, paved shoulder of the road, coming to a smooth stop under the shade of a large oak tree. Rourke pulled up behind, offset slightly for safety. He took a deep breath, that old familiar adrenaline starting to pulse, just a little. He called in the stop, his voice a flat monotone, giving the location and plate number. Then he stepped out, adjusting his utility belt, his hand resting casually near his holster. The sunshine was warm, but the air in his lungs felt sharp. He walked slowly toward the driver's side of the SUV, his boots crunching on the gravel. He could see nothing inside, just his own distorted reflection in the dark glass. As he approached the driver's window, it began to lower silently, powered by electricity. It didn't go all the way down, just enough for communication. The driver was a black man, probably in his late 40s. He had a strong, quiet face, close-cropped hair with hints of gray at the temples. He was wearing a simple, dark polo shirt. No jewelry, no flash. His hands were resting on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. His eyes, watchful and calm, found Rourke's. "Afternoon?" the driver said. His voice was deep, level. Not friendly, not hostile. Just there. Rourke didn't return the greeting. He leaned down slightly, peering past the man into the interior of the car. It was immaculate. Leather seats, a navigation screen on the dash. No air fresheners, no junk, no passengers. Just this one man in a vault of quiet, cool air. "Do you know why I pulled you over today?" Rourke asked, his standard opening line. His tone was all business. No warmth. The man took a slow breath. I assume it's about the window tint, officer. I was planning to get it adjusted. It came this way from the dealership. The answer was too ready, too smooth for Rourke. It sounded like an excuse, something prepared in advance. It's well past the legal limit, Rourke stated. I need to see your driver's license and vehicle registration. Of course, the man said. He moved slowly, deliberately. His right hand went to the center console, popping open a compartment. He pulled out a small leather wallet and a folded piece of paper, the registration. He handed both out the window. Rourke took them. He opened the wallet. Behind a clear plastic window was a standard driver's license. The photo matched the man. The name was unremarkable. The address was local and in a very good neighborhood. Rourke glanced at it, then flipped to the next card in the wallet. It was a military identification card. It had the man's photo, his name, and a lot of official-looking printing. The word retired was not on it. Rourke's eyes scanned it quickly, but the only thing his brain seemed to latch onto was the branch. U.S. Army. He'd seen these before. Guys who served, sometimes they liked to flash this stuff, thinking it meant something special on a traffic stop. He looked from the ID back to the man's face. The calm, steady gaze was starting to feel like a challenge to him. Like this guy thought he was above the process. This isn't a driver's license, Rourke said, tapping the military ID with his finger before handing both cards back through the window. The man's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something incredulity maybe passed through his eyes. It's my military identification. The driver's license is right behind it. I provided both, as requested. Rourke ignored the clarification. The procedural dance was slipping away. His initial feeling was hardening into certainty. This guy was being difficult. He was hiding behind an ID, talking in that measured, controlled tone that felt like disrespect. I need you to step out of the vehicle for me, sir, Rourke said. It wasn't a request. His voice had an edge to it now. The driver didn't move for a second. He just looked at Rourke, really looked at him, as if trying to understand a complex puzzle. Officer, he said, his voice still calm but firmer. Is that necessary? I've provided my documents. The tint is a fix-it ticket. Why do you need me to step out? That was it. The pushback. In Rourke's world, when you're told to step out of the car, you step out. Questions meant you had something to hide. This man, in his expensive car with his dark windows and his cool demeanor, was now refusing a lawful order. I am not asking, Rourke said, his voice low and cold. He took a half-step back from the door, creating space. His posture shifted, becoming more rigid, more ready. Step out of the vehicle? No. A heavy silence hung in the air for a beat. The only sound was the faint hum of a lawnmower in the distance. The driver gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of agreement, but of resignation. He reached down, turned off the ignition, and slowly opened the door. He unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was tall, well-built, and he moved with a kind of economical grace. He stood beside his car, facing Rourke, his arms at his sides. He wasn't slouching, but he wasn't standing at attention either. He was just waiting. Rourke felt the dynamic shift. Now they were on his turf, outside the car. The man's calmness was unnerving. Most people were nervous by this point, fidgeting, talking too much, their eyes wide. This man was like a rock. It felt like a power play. Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the vehicle. Please, Rourke instructed, gesturing with his hand. The man didn't comply immediately. He held Rourke's gaze. On what grounds, officer? You stopped me for a window tint violation. I am being fully cooperative. What is the reason for this? The question asked so logically, so directly, was like a spark landing on dry tinder in Rourke's mind. The feeling exploded into a hot, bright conviction. This man wasn't just difficult. He was dangerous. He was challenging authority on a quiet street in broad daylight. He had to be in control. And in this moment, on the shoulder of asphalt, Officer Mark Rourke was determined to prove who was really in control. The man stood perfectly still beside his car, the dappled shade from the oak tree shifting slightly in a breeze he couldn't feel. The officer's command to put his hands on the roof of the vehicle hung in the air between them, charged and unnatural. He had heard that tone before. It was the tone that preceded bad things, the tone that closed doors instead of opening them. He took a slow, quiet breath, the kind of breath you take when you're trying to keep 1,000 other things in check. Inside, a storm of reactions fought for control. There was the instinctive, hot surge of outrage, a feeling he knew well, but had learned long ago to compartmentalize. There was the cold, analytical part of his brain already assessing the situation like a tactical problem. One agitated officer, a public street, witnesses possibly in cars driving past. And there was a deeper, wearier feeling, a heavy familiarity. It was the feeling of a script being followed, one where he hadn't been given his lines. But the ending was always the same. "Officer," he said again, his voice deliberately even, a flat calm over deep water. "I am complying with your traffic stop. I have given you my identification. I have exited my vehicle as you instructed. Now, I need you to explain to me the reason for this escalation. What is your probable cause to detain me further?" Officer Rourke's face tightened. The man's calm logic felt like a direct attack. It wasn't the sputtering fear or the angry bluster he was used to. This was different. This felt like being managed, and he was the one in uniform. He took a step closer, invading the space. "The reason is I'm conducting an investigation," Rourke stated, his voice losing any last shred of bureaucratic politeness. "Now, turn around and put your hands on the car. I won't tell you again." The phrase "I'm conducting an investigation" was so vague, so clearly a cover for the officer's own simmering anger, that it almost broke the man's composure. Almost. He had stood before foreign generals and hostile politicians who used more sophisticated versions of the same bluff. He knew power, real power, and this wasn't it. This was something much smaller and much more dangerous. He made a decision. He would comply, but not surrender. He would follow the physical instruction to de-escalate the immediate threat, but he would not stop using his voice. It was a narrow path to walk. "All right," the man said, the word heavy with unspoken protest. He turned slowly and placed his broad hands flat on the cool, smooth roof of his SUV. The posture was one of vulnerability, but his back was straight, his head held level. He was not cowering. Rourke moved quickly then. He approached from the side. "Keep your hands right where they are." He took the man's right wrist, then his left, and with a swift, practiced click-click, secured the handcuffs. The metal was cold and tight. The sound of the cuffs locking into place was a small, final sound. It was the sound of the situation snapping into a new and terrible reality. For the first time, a real flicker of anger, hot and sharp, went through the man. It wasn't about the discomfort. It was about the profound, symbolic wrongness of it. He focused on the feeling of the car's roof under his palms, the grain of the paint, something real to tether himself to. Rourke, now that the cuffs were on, seemed to relax a fraction. He had asserted control. He began a pat-down, his hands moving over the man's polo shirt, his trousers. He found no weapons, no bulges, nothing but the man's wallet and a cell phone in his pocket. He confiscated the phone. "You can turn around now," Rourke said, stepping back. The man turned. His cuffed hands hung in front of him. His face was a mask, but his eyes had changed. The calm was still there, but it was now the calm of a deep freeze, not a still pond. "This is a mistake, officer," the man said, his voice low. "A serious one. You are detaining a senior officer of the United States Army for a traffic violation. You need to stop and think about what you are doing." Rourke gave a short, humorless laugh. It was a dry, brittle sound. "Senior officer? Right. You know, I've met a lot of guys like you. You get a little rank, you think it's a free pass. You think you can talk down to people." He looked the man up and down, taking in the plain polo, the civilian trousers. "You don't look like any general I've ever seen. You look like a guy in a fancy car with something to hide." The words, "you look like a guy with something to hide," hung in the air. They weren't about the tint anymore. They were about something else entirely. The man felt the weight of them, the old, ugly implication. "My appearance is irrelevant," the man replied, the frost in his voice deepening. "My identification is valid. Call your dispatch. Have them verify my service status. Or call the base. I will give you the number for the headquarters. This can all be resolved in 2 minutes if you would simply do your job correctly." "My job?" Rourke shot back, his temper flaring again at the implied criticism. "My job is to deal with people who don't follow the law. People who think they're above it because they drive a nice car. You're not the first guy to try and flash a military ID to get out of trouble, pal. It doesn't impress me." He gestured with his head toward his patrol car. "We're going to take a ride. We'll sort it out at the station." The man did not move. The idea of being placed in the back of that car, of being processed, of this Cherical becoming an official record, was unthinkable. It was beyond personal insult. It was a violation of everything he had spent his life upholding. "No," the man said, the word absolute. Rourke blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no. I am not getting in your car. You have no lawful basis to arrest me. You have no probable cause. This is an illegal detention, and you are compounding your error with every second. Uncuff me now." For Officer Rourke, this was the final, undeniable proof. This man was not just difficult. He was a direct threat to his authority. The calm was a facade. Now the resistance was out in the open defiance of a direct order. All his training, all his years of ingrained protocol, narrowed down to this moment. A non-compliant subject. His hand moved to the grip of his service weapon, not drawing it, but resting there. It was a communication, a threat of its own. His voice dropped to a harsh, tense whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. You are under arrest for obstruction. You will walk to my vehicle, and you will get in the back seat. If you refuse, if you resist in any way, I will use whatever force is necessary to get you there. Do you understand me?" The two men locked eyes. One saw a belligerent, arrogant citizen who needed to be made an example of. The other saw a public servant blinded by pride, racing down a path that would ruin them both. The sun beat down. A car slowed as it passed, the driver's face a pale oval of curiosity before moving on. The man with the cuffs saw the officer's trembling anger, the unprofessional hand on the gun. He knew he was one wrong word, one sudden move, away from a catastrophe. The tactical part of his brain won. He had to de-escalate, even if it meant surrender for now. "I understand you," the man said, his voice devoid of all emotion. It was pure, hollow transmission. "I will walk to your car." He took a step, then another, his movements stiff with suppressed fury. The gravel crunched under his shoes. Each step was an act of will. He was not walking to the cruiser because he recognized the officer's authority. He was walking because it was the only way to prevent a worse disaster from happening right there on the side of the road. He was buying time, though for what, He didn't yet know. The cold metal around his wrists was a constant, biting reminder of the injustice, a feeling he had fought wars to prevent, now happening to him in his own country, on a street he drove down every day. The walk to the patrol car was the longest 20 feet of the man's life. Each step was a deliberate, mechanical act. The gravel under his shoes crunched with a sound that was too loud in his own ears. He could feel the officer close behind him, a tense presence shepherding him forward. The world seemed to narrow down to the back door of the black and white cruiser, which yawned open like a mouth. His mind, usually a place of orderly strategy and clear chains of command, was a clash of warring impulses. Part of him screamed to plant his feet, to refuse, to make this officer physically drag him. That part was pure, hot fire. But the older, more disciplined part, the part that had made life-or-death decisions under real fire, clamped down on it. That part saw the unstable tension in the officer's movements, the hand that kept drifting near his weapon. This was no longer about a traffic stop. This was a volatile situation that could ignite in a heartbeat. His job now was to survive it without giving the officer a single excuse. He reached the open door. The interior of the cruiser smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and old sweat. The hard plastic seat awaited him. "Get in," Officer Rourke said, his voice tight. The man paused. He turned his head slightly, not his whole body. His hands were still cuffed in front of him. "Officer," he said, his voice low but piercingly clear, "this is your last chance to correct this error. Before you put me in this car, think. Make the call. Verify who I am. If you do this, there will be consequences you cannot imagine." He wasn't pleading. He was stating a fact. It was a final warning, delivered with the cold certainty of a weather report, predicting a hurricane. For Officer Rourke, it was the ultimate act of defiance. The man wasn't just resisting. He was threatening him. In Rourke's mind, the ID was a fake. The car was probably suspicious, and this calm, commanding act was the performance of a con man who thought he could talk his way out of anything. The warning wasn't heard as a truth, but as a bluff that had to be called. "I don't need to imagine anything," Rourke spat back, his patience shattering. "I'm done talking to you. Get in the car." He moved then, not to guide, but to shove. He put a hand on the man's shoulder and pushed him roughly toward the open door. It was the wrong move. The physical contact broke the last thread of the man's calculated compliance. As he was shoved, his body instinctively braced, his balance shifted. He didn't fall into the car. He stumbled against the door frame, catching himself. He turned, a sudden, powerful motion, born of pure reaction. His face, finally, showed the fury he had been bottling up. It wasn't a wild anger, but a focused, terrifyingly cold rage. Rourke saw the movement, the shift from passive to active resistance. Every alarm bell in his training, now filtered through a lens of fear and ego, went off at once. His brain short-circuited. The subject was turning, possibly attacking, definitely not complying. He didn't think. In one fluid, panicked motion, he cleared his weapon from its holster. The sound of the mechanism was a sharp, definitive click in the still air. He took a two-handed grip and brought the pistol up, pointing it directly at the center of the man's chest. The black muzzle was a tiny abyssal hole, not 6 feet away. "Do not move." Rourke screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Put your hands on your head." "Do IT now, OR? I will put you down." Time stopped. The man froze. Every muscle in his body locked. The world dissolved until there was nothing but the officer's wide, frantic eyes over the sights of the gun and the terrifying circular void of the barrel. The cold metal of the cuffs on his wrists was forgotten. The smell of the car was gone. There was only the weapon and the trembling hands holding it. A profound, eerie silence descended. The distant lawnmower had stopped. Traffic seemed to have vanished. The only sound was the ragged, panicked breath whistling from the officer's nostrils. In that silence, something in the man broke. Not into fear, but into a kind of crystal clear, absolute understanding. This was no longer about disrespect or procedure or even illegal detention. This was about survival. And in that understanding, a lifetime of training and command reasserted itself. Rising above the personal insult, above the rage, he did not put his hands on his head. He could not. They were cuffed. Instead, he very, very slowly raised them to chest level, palms out, a universal sign of I am not a threat. He made his body utterly still, a statue. His voice, when he spoke, did not sound like his own. It was flat, devoid of all inflection, each word carved from ice and spaced with deliberate clarity. It was the voice he would use to report a catastrophic systems failure. Officer, you are pointing a loaded service weapon at a United States Army Lieutenant General. My name is withheld. My service number is withheld. I am assigned to the office of the Secretary of the Army. You have assaulted me. You have illegally detained me. And you are now threatening my life without justification. Lower your weapon. The words hung in the air. They were so specific, so detailed, so utterly lacking in bluster or panic, that they seemed to physically strike Officer Rourke. The color drained from his face. The frantic fury in his eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. The gun in his hands, which a second before had felt like an extension of his own will, now felt like a red-hot piece of iron. It was too heavy. He couldn't move. You're lying, Rourke whispered, but the conviction was gone. It was a plea, not an accusation. From the corner of his eye, the man saw movement. A car had stopped on the opposite shoulder. A woman was holding up her phone, recording. Another car slowed, then another. An audience was gathering for the unthinkable drama. He kept his eyes locked on the officers. I am not lying. The proof is in my wallet, which you have. The proof is one phone call away. The only question now, officer, is how much of your life you want to destroy in the next 60 seconds. Lower your weapon. The command in his voice was absolute. It was not the command of a victim, but of a man who was used to being obeyed in the most dire circumstances. Officer Rourke's arms began to shake. The gun wavered. The sheer, terrifying plausibility of it crashed over him. The man's demeanor, his chilling calm even with a gun pointed at him, the specific details? No street thug, no con man, talked like that. Fear, real and sour, flooded his mouth. This wasn't a traffic stop gone bad anymore. This was the end of everything. With a jerky, uncoordinated motion, he let the muzzle drop, pointing it at the ground. He didn't reholster it. He just held it there, limp in his hand, as if he'd forgotten how it worked. The man did not sigh in relief. He did not move. The threat was diminished, but not gone. The officer was still in a state of shocked panic, and a panicked man with a gun was still dangerously unpredictable. Now, the man continued in that same deadly calm tone, you will remove these handcuffs? Then you will return my property. Then you will step back to your vehicle and await instructions. But Officer Rourke was broken. He just stood there, staring at the ground, the gun dangling from his fingers. The script had been ripped up, and he had no idea what his lines were. The standoff had reached a new precarious stage. The weapon was down, but the crisis was far from over. The man was still cuffed. The officer was catatonic with shock. And a small ring of horrified citizens watched from a distance, their cell phones silently capturing every second of the quiet, shameful aftermath of a mistake that had gone too far. The real reckoning was just over the horizon, and its approach could be felt in the trembling of the officer's hands and the young, stone-like stillness of the man in the polo shirt. The drive from the chaotic roadside to the police station was made in the colonel's sedan. The lieutenant general sat in the back, staring out the window at the familiar streets passing by. The familiar felt alien now. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving behind a deep, cold hollow. His wrists ached, a physical echo of the violation. But that was a surface wound. The deeper hurt was a dull, heavy thing in his chest. It wasn't about him, not really. It was about the system, the script, the terrifyingly familiar play that had just run its course. Only this time, the ending had been rewritten because of the stars on his ID dot at the station. The atmosphere was one of quiet, frantic deference. He was ushered not into an interview room, but into the chief's own private office. Someone brought him a bottle of cold water. The chief and the mayor sat opposite him, looking like people waiting for a verdict. The colonel stood by the door, a silent, imposing guard. They wanted his statement. He gave it again. Calm, precise, chronological. He recited the insults, the escalation, the cold feel of the cuffs, the blinding look of the gun barrel. He did not raise his voice. The monotone of his delivery was more damning than any shout could have been. As he spoke, he watched the mayor close her eyes, just for a second, as if in pain. When he finished, the chief spoke, his voice gravelly with shame. "Sir, the officer's body camera footage and the dashcam video from his cruiser have been secured. The bystander videos are being collected. The evidence is unequivocal. There is no justification, none, for what he did. His conduct was a gross abuse of power and a violation of every principle this department claims to uphold." The general took a slow sip of water. "What happens now?" he asked, though he already knew. The chief exchanged a glance with the mayor. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the desk. "What happens now," she said, "is immediate accountability. We are not waiting for a lengthy internal affairs process. The city manager, the council president, and I have been on a conference call. The decision is unanimous." She took a breath. "Officer Rourke has been terminated. Not suspended. Terminated. His employment with this city ended the moment he holstered his weapon. We will be making a public announcement within the hour. Furthermore, we will be cooperating fully with any military investigation and with the county prosecutor's office for a criminal review of his actions." The general nodded slowly. It was the right answer. The only answer. But it felt like closing the barn door after the horse had not only escaped, but trampled you on its way out. "And then what?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the room. The chief looked down at his hands. The mayor's confident posture softened. They understood. Firing one man solved a political problem. It did not fix the broken thing that had allowed it to happen. "We will be initiating a full, independent review of our training protocols, especially concerning de-escalation and implicit bias," the chief said, the words sounding practiced but sincere. "We will be mandating new training for every officer." "Good," the general said. It was a small word. He placed the water bottle on the desk with a soft click. "But training is for the future. It doesn't help the person in the car today, the one without the ID that makes mayors and chiefs scramble. That man still gets the gun pointed at him. That man still goes to jail. That man's life still gets torn apart." He looked at each of them. "I didn't get my rank by ignoring root causes. You've cut out a tumor. Now you need to treat the disease." He stood up. The meeting was over. He had no desire to be in that building a second longer. Outside, the late afternoon had turned to evening. News vans had gathered, their satellite dishes raised like strange mechanical flowers. The colonel moved to shield him, but the general stopped him with a slight shake of his head. He walked towards the microphones and cameras. The colonel and the chastened city officials a few steps behind. The mayor gave a short, somber statement, confirming the termination and offering a profound apology to the general and his family. Then she stepped back. The general stepped to the microphones. The cameras flashed. He looked tired. He looked human. He was no longer a symbol in a story, but a man who had been through something. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying easily in the hush. "I have accepted the city's apology." The swift termination of the officer involved was the correct and necessary first step. He paused, letting his eyes travel over the reporters and beyond them to the darkening streets. "But this is not about me. What happened today would be wrong if it happened to anyone. It does happen to people every day. The only reason this incident ended differently is because of the uniform I wear, a uniform I am privileged to have. What about the citizen who doesn't have that? What is their recourse?" He leaned slightly towards the microphones. "So, while I appreciate the personal apology, what I need from this city and from every community is action. Not just a review of policy, but a transformation of culture. A commitment that the safety and dignity of every person is the only badge of authority that matters. Today, a man was fired. Tomorrow, the real work must begin. Thank you." He stepped away, ignoring the shouted questions. He was done. In the weeks that followed, the story did not fade. The body camera footage was released. It was worse than anyone imagined. The public heard the sneering insults, saw the panicked draw of the weapon. The officer's voice, screaming, "I will put you down," became a chilling soundbite on national news. The fired officer vanished from public view, facing not only unemployment, but a looming investigation and the crushing weight of universal condemnation. His life, as he knew it, was obliterated. For the general, life slowly returned to a new normal. The soreness in his wrists faded. The paperwork and official inquiries were processed. But he was changed. He found himself watching his young junior officers with an even sharper eye, drilling into them the concepts of judgment, restraint, and the crushing weight of the power they held. He spoke about the incident not as a victim, but as a case study in catastrophic failure. He also received letters, hundreds of them, from other Black service members who had similar, quieter stories, from civilians who had faced the same fear but lacked the platform, from police officers around the country who wrote to say they were ashamed and were working to do better. The letters were a heavy weight, but he read every one. They were a reminder that his terrible afternoon had become a symbol, a stark, public example of a private pain shared by millions. One evening, standing in his own driveway, looking at his own car, he replayed it all in his mind. The tinted windows, the feeling of being targeted for the space he occupied, the cold shock of the metal, the blinding void of the gun. He thought of the officer, whose face he could barely remember now, just a mask of fear and fury. The man had been fired, immediately and rightly. But the general knew justice was more than a firing. Justice was making sure no one else had to stand on that shoulder, feeling that particular blend of terror and fury. It was a long, hard road. But as he turned and walked towards his house, where the lights were warm and on, he knew it was the only road worth walking. The battle on the roadside was over. The larger war for respect and basic dignity continued, and he was still a soldier in it. The afternoon sun was lazy, pouring through the big windows of the coffee shop and making the air feel warm and slow. The place was busy, full of the low hum of people talking, the sharp hiss of the espresso machine, and the soft tapping on laptop keys. It smelled like roasted coffee beans and sweet pastries. People were tucked into corners with books or leaning over tables having quiet meetings, all in their own little worlds. Officer Dan Ridley pushed the door open, and a small bell chimed above him. He wasn't really here for coffee. His patrol car was parked out front, a clear symbol of his presence. He liked these little visits to local businesses. They were good for community relations, sure, but more than that, they were good for him. They reminded people who he was. The uniform did things. It made some people nervous, it made others overly friendly, and it gave him a kind of power in any room he walked into. He took his time walking to the counter, nodding slowly at a few customers who made eye contact. He enjoyed the way their conversations dipped for a second when they saw him. He got a large black coffee, no sugar. He didn't pay. The young guy at the register, a new kid with nervous eyes, just shook his head and said, "On the house, officer." Ridley gave him a tight smile. Of course it was. He turned, leaning his back against the counter, sipping the bitter coffee as his eyes traveled around the room. That's when he saw her. She was sitting at a small two-person table near the back, partly shielded by a large, leafy potted plant. A law textbook, thick and heavy, was open in front of her, and she was scribbling notes in a neat, quick hand in a spiral notebook. She was beautiful, but it wasn't a loud, attention-seeking kind of beauty. It was in her concentration, the way a little line of focus appeared between her eyebrows, the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear without even looking up. She was completely absorbed in her work. A little island of quiet study in the middle of the noisy cafe. Something stirred in Ridley. It was a familiar feeling, a mix of boredom, entitlement, and a desire to disrupt that quiet focus. He liked proving that his presence was more important than any book. He pushed himself off the counter and started moving through the tables, his boots making a soft, deliberate sound on the wooden floor. He stopped right at the edge of her table, his shadow falling across the pages of her book. She didn't look up immediately, hoping he would just move on. He didn't. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low, official rumble. She finally glanced up, her eyes a calm, clear brown. "Hello, officer." Her voice was polite, but flat. She offered a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then looked back down at her text, a clear signal that the conversation was over. He didn't take the hint. He shifted his weight, making himself more solidly planted there. "Everything okay over here? You look very focused." He let the last word hang in the air, implying something more. "Just studying." "Thank you," she said, not looking up this time, her pen continuing to move. "Big book," he said, reaching out and tapping the cover with a thick finger. "Law school? That's tough. You must be really smart." It sounded like a compliment, but his tone was all wrong. It was sticky, like syrup. She paused her writing. "Yes, it's a lot of work." She tried to infuse her tone with a finality, hoping he would hear the "please leave me alone" in it. He didn't. Instead, he pulled out the empty chair opposite her and sat down without being invited. The wood groaned under his weight. He set his coffee cup on her table, right next to her notebook. It was an invasion, a claim of territory. She subtly pulled her notebook a few inches closer to herself. "Don't see many pretty girls buried in books like this on a nice day," he said, leaning forward on his elbows. His gaze was no longer on the book, but squarely on her face, then drifting down, then back up. It was a slow, appraising look that made her skin feel tight. She felt a cold trickle of unease in her stomach. The politeness was a shield, but it was getting thin. "I have an exam," she said, her voice a little tighter now. "All work and no play," he chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "A girl like you should be out enjoying herself. You know, a friend of mine owns a nice bar downtown. Quiet, classy. Maybe I could give you a tour after my shift. We could talk about your career plans." He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was a smile that offered a deal, one where he held all the cards. The girl, whose name was Maya, though Ridley hadn't bothered to ask, felt a hot flush of anger rise up her neck, mixing with the cold fear. She knew this game. She'd seen it before, but never so brazenly, never from someone wearing a badge. The uniform was supposed to mean safety. On him, right now, it felt like a threat. "That's not going to happen," she said, her voice clear and firm now. She looked him directly in the eyes. "I need to study. Please, I'd like you to leave my table." She emphasized the "my." Ridley's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He wasn't used to being dismissed. His authority was being questioned, and by a young girl with a book. He leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more threatening than his loud talk. "Look," he said, his eyes hard. "I'm just trying to be friendly. It's good to have friends in this city, especially friends who know the law, if you catch my drift." He let the vague threat hang in the air. "I noticed your car out there, the little blue hatchback, parked awfully close to the hydrant, don't you think? I'd hate for you to get a ticket, or have it towed. That would really ruin your study day." This was the move. The shift from fake charm to open coercion. He was no longer asking. He was implying a trade. Her time, her attention, her compliance, in exchange for him not using his power to punish her. Maya's heart was pounding against her ribs. She knew her car was perfectly legally parked. This was pure invention, a tool. She felt trapped. If she yelled, would anyone help her against a police officer? If she gave in to his disgusting offer, what then? Her mind raced, but her face remained a careful mask of calm. She didn't answer him. She just held his gaze, her own filled with a cold, defiant silence. Unseen by Officer Ridley, this entire performance had an audience of one. In the far corner, partially obscured by a tall shelf of coffee mugs and bags of beans, a man in a well-cut but simple suit had been typing on a laptop. He had seen Ridley walk in. He had watched the officer's posture change as he spotted the young woman. He had seen the uninvited sit-down, the leaning in, the shift in the young woman's body language from relaxed to rigid. His own typing had stopped minutes ago. His hands were now still on the keyboard, his face an impassive mask. But his eyes, a sharp, focused gray, missed nothing. They watched the whispered threat, the fear in the set of the young woman's shoulders, the arrogant set of the officer's jaw. A deep, cold anger began to burn quietly in the pit of his stomach. This was happening in his city, in his coffee shop, under his watch. And he had seen enough.